World War II, it wasn't just another war. It was the conflict that literally melted down the old world and forged the one we are all living in right now. It was born from the shaky, unstable peace of the war that came before it, and honestly, its consequences are still echoing all around us. So, let's get into it.
To really understand why this war exploded, you have to look at the quiet that came right before it. And this quote, "This was the hope." British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain said this in 1938 after giving a piece of Czechoslovakia to Hitler. The policy was called appeasement, and it came from this desperate, deep-seated desire to avoid another massive war. But, as we all know now, this wasn't peace. It was the calm before a hurricane.
So how did we get here? Well, the roots of World War II are actually buried in the end of World War I. The Treaty of Versailles was so punishing, it left Germany totally humiliated and economically shattered. So when the Great Depression came along, it was just the perfect storm of desperation. It created a vacuum that allowed these authoritarian leaders in Germany, Italy, and Japan to just sweep in and seize power, all promising a return to greatness.
And when you look at this timeline, it's not random. It is a clear, chilling pattern of escalation. With every single move, remilitarizing the Rhineland, annexing Austria, Hitler was basically testing the waters, pushing to see what the Western democracies would do, and he found out they'd do very little. So, believing no one would really stop him, he finally gave the order to invade Poland on September 1st, 1939, and that was it. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war. The policy of appeasement had completely failed.
The beginning of the war was, well, it was a rout, just shockingly one-sided. The Axis powers, with Germany in the lead, unleashed a totally new kind of warfare that brought almost all of Europe to its knees in less than a year. The speed, the ferocity, it was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before.
The key to all this success was a new military doctrine called Blitzkrieg. It's German for lightning war, and this wasn't just a tactic. It was designed as a psychological weapon, built to absolutely shatter an enemy's ability and will to fight. It was the total opposite of the slow, grinding trench warfare from World War I, a war that, tragically, a lot of Allied commanders were still mentally stuck in.
Think of it like a devastating 1-2-3 punch. First, air power. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, would dominate the skies, hitting airfields, communications, anything to create chaos. Then came the armored spearhead, fast-moving Panzer tank divisions that would just punch a hole in the enemy lines and race deep into their territory. And finally, motorized infantry would pour through the gap to surround and mop up the enemy forces, who were by now totally panicked and cut off. From Poland to France, this strategy was just unstoppable.
So by the summer of 1940, it looked like it was all over. France had fallen. Almost all of mainland Europe was under Nazi control. Only Great Britain stood alone, defiant, helped in a huge way by the new technology of radar. And its new prime minister, Winston Churchill, he just refused to give in. His words captured the fighting spirit of an entire nation as it faced the Battle of Britain and the Blitz.
But here's the thing about that kind of lightning-fast success: it can make you reckless. And overconfidence led the Axis to make two really fateful decisions in 1941 that dragged the entire planet into the war. First, Germany launched a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. And second, Japan launched its surprise attack on the United States at Pearl Harbor. And just like that, the world's two biggest industrial powers were in the fight.
The first major, and I mean major, turning point came in the Pacific. Because American codebreakers had cracked Japanese naval codes, the U.S. Navy was able to set a trap and ambush the Japanese fleet at the Battle of Midway. The number you see here, 4, that's the number of veteran Japanese aircraft carriers sunk in a single battle. It was a devastating blow that the Imperial Navy never, ever recovered from. Japan's expansion was officially halted.
At the same time, halfway across the world, the tide was turning in North Africa. After a huge British victory at El Alamein, Allied forces trapped the Axis armies there. This led to the surrender of about 300,000 experienced German and Italian soldiers. That victory secured the Mediterranean and paved the way for the invasion of Italy.
But if you had to pick the single most definitive turning point of the war, it has to be on the Eastern Front. At Stalingrad, the German war machine, which was already stretched super thin, was just bled white. The Soviets managed to encircle and completely annihilate the entire German Sixth Army, losing another 300,000 soldiers. It was a catastrophe that shattered the myth of Nazi invincibility. It was the beginning of the Red Army's long, bloody march to Berlin.
Okay, so with the momentum completely shifted, the Allies started to close the ring. They were fueled by two massive forces: the incredible industrial power of the United States, the so-called arsenal of democracy, whose factories were outproducing all the Axis powers combined, and the seemingly endless manpower of the Soviet Union. The final offensives were about to begin.
And the culmination of all that power, all that planning, came on this day, D-Day. The Allies finally opened that second front in Western Europe that Stalin had been demanding for so long. It was a day of just unbelievable bravery and horrific, horrific sacrifice. But by the time the sun set, the Allies had a foothold in France. The final push to liberate the continent was on. The end was now in sight. You could feel it. In Europe, Allied armies were squeezing Germany from the east and the west. In the Pacific, a brutal, agonizing, island-hopping campaign was bringing American forces closer and closer to Japan. But the moment of victory, it would also bring two of the most profound and terrible revelations in all of human history.
Because as Allied soldiers pushed into Germany and Poland, they started liberating camps. And what they found inside, it just stopped the world cold. The full, systematic evil of the Nazi regime was finally laid bare for everyone to see.
The Holocaust wasn't just some byproduct of the war. No, it was a central goal of Nazi ideology. This discovery of industrial-scale genocide, of gas chambers, of crematoria, of skeletal survivors, it fundamentally challenged the entire world's understanding of human rights and what civilization was truly capable of, for better and for worse.
And in the Pacific, the war ended with another terrifying revelation, this one of technological power. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki forced Japan to surrender, but they also introduced a weapon of almost unimaginable power into the world. In an instant, warfare, international politics, the entire planet had been changed forever.
So what was the final bill? The final tally it's almost impossible to really wrap your head around it. An estimated 75 million people were killed, and the majority of them were civilians. Places like the Soviet Union and China lost tens of millions of people. A level of destruction this massive demanded a complete rethinking of how the world should work.
So what comes next? From the absolute rubble of cities like Warsaw, Dresden, and Hiroshima, the survivors had to build a new world, one that was specifically designed to try and prevent a catastrophe like this from ever happening again. The geopolitical map was completely redrawn.
The alliances that won the war directly shaped the post-war world. The United Nations was created right out of their framework as a second attempt to do what the League of Nations had failed to. But that same alliance quickly cracked, giving us the two-sided Cold War. The conflict also completely exhausted the old European colonial powers, which sped up independence movements and redrew the maps of Africa and Asia. And in the shadow of the Holocaust, the State of Israel was founded.
Pretty much every major institution, every border, every alliance we have today is in some way a product of this war. It proved the absolute depths of human cruelty, but it also showed us the incredible heights of courage and sacrifice. Which leaves us with one last question to think about. Of all the lessons this war taught us, which is the one we can least afford to